بسم الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. I'm going to do the Egyptian thing to do. Check out everything in your pockets before you get started. Anyone who lives in Egypt knows what I'm talking about. You go to a restaurant, like everything's on the table. 2 cell phones, 3 cell phones, 4 sets of keys. Yeah. So, the topic is the art of manliness. And then you had a really long description, like you have on all of the lectures, mashallah, really long descriptions. Allah bless you guys. And there's so many things that can be said. So the first thing that I want to say is that the most important, actually, okay, if I say that, that's going to be problematic. The most important resource for you is the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Manliness is lived, and as such it's important to read the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and understand how he lived. That's the first thing. The second kind of modern, relevant resource for you is the artofmanliness.com. So, artofmanliness.com. How many people have seen this website? Very good. The movement is growing. Artofmanliness.com is a really, really important website. Today when I opened it up, the article was about what to do if you get pulled over by a police officer. Very useful information. Assuming that without breaking the law, he even says that. The assumption is that you haven't done anything really seriously illegal. Maybe you're speeding or something. But what do you do? How do you engage the situation and so on? So there's really a lot of good stuff on there. So I would recommend to people to kind of bookmark it or do whatever you need to do in order to get daily updates, follow the Twitter account, whatever it is, and read those articles, because there's really some very, very good articles on that website that deal with all issues of manliness. Because a lot of times when we look at the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, even the lives of the righteous people before us, we get a lot of good general guidances about important concepts and ideas, but they're not always fully filled in. And one of the consequences of the life that we live now is that we're usually largely detached from the people that we live around, so we don't get to pick up the day-to-day skills. I told you guys I was in Canada last week, and my cousin, I was talking to him. Basically, my cousin, we'll go back even further. My uncle, my uncle said maybe 30, 40 years ago they had a piece of property, they wanted to build a house, right? So he said, you know how much money we spent on the labor of the home? I said, how much? He said, we spent, I think it was $528 on labor for the entire home. Because your uncle comes, and your cousin comes, and your in-laws come, and your friends come, and everyone knows how to do stuff. This person knows how to do the plumbing, this person knows how to do the electricity, this person knows how to do the roofing, this one knows about carpentry, so on. Like, everybody has their own skills and their ability. If a car breaks down, they know how to fix a car, so on and so forth. I'm not immune to these problems, just to be fair. But there's a lot of things that you learn when you have close family ties, when you have father figures or grandfather figures that are there to pass these things down. In the moments when you're not really expecting stuff. Like one time I was listening to, how many people have listened to Cornell, Smiley and West? Anyone listening to Smiley and West? Okay, Smiley and West is by Travis Smiley and Cornell West. They have a radio show that comes out every week, and it comments on social and political issues. And one time, a few months back, I think it was, they had Brother Ali on the show. And one of the things he was saying that he picked up when he was a kid, one of the advices that he got when he was getting picked on, is that he was told, don't ever let your chin and your chest touch. Don't ever let your chin and your chest touch. Like, don't get your head down like that and let them think that they beat you. That you still have that, right? So it's like those moments of advice that you get from living with people. And that's something that we lose a lot of times with the increased disconnection of people, right? So that's the first thing, is the artofmanliness.com is an important resource in this regard. Ahmed, what time is my 22 minutes end? Where do you go? Yes. What time does the 22 minutes end? 5:38. 5:38. And is it 5:20 right now? Is that accurate? Yes. Okay. So what I want to ask you first, and Ustad Hassan will get into some some particular examples are what are some of the qualities that you think a man should have? I'll do what I did in the last session, just to kind of maintain some level of order. So we'll start over here, and then we'll move from section to section. So please, like if you're here and we're over there, let them talk. But we won't start with you this time, we'll start with you. What are some of the qualities of manliness that you think a person should have? This is a very important discussion, by the way. Very, very important discussion. Yeah? Confidence. Responsibility.
Restraint.
Restraint. Huh? Hiding. Sana.
Bravery.
Bravery. Humility. Okay, I'm going to take one more from this section before we run out of all the cardinal virtues for you. Not yet. Okay. Compassion. Okay. I'm going to skip you guys. I'm sorry. I know there's more to be said. We'll go over here. Yeah. Respect. I don't know. Just figure it out amongst yourselves. Yeah. Integrity. If he makes a promise, he does it. And what's that? Yeah. Conviction. Very good. Yeah.
Emotional control.
Emotional control. Right. Control of emotions. Okay. But not the absence of emotion. Definitely. Okay. Bravery. Did someone say that? Okay, that's all right. We'll take that one twice. We need that today. Yeah. Empathy. Wisdom. Now we're running out of cardinal virtues. Yeah. Dignity. Okay. Other side. You guys, any stuff you want to pick up? Okay. Never being bored. Wow. That's a really good one. Never being bored. I like it. Actually, I think that's a good standard to think about. If you get bored, who said that one time? Where did I hear that? Said if you're always complaining about being bored, it's probably chances are that you're boring. That's why you're always bored. Yeah. Independence. Okay. Hayat, modesty. Yeah. Patient. Trustworthy. Cleanliness. Honesty. Grateful. Any others from? Okay. Chivalry. What is chivalry? Uh-oh. I'm asking because I don't know. I've been trying to figure out what the word means for a while, and I just can't figure it out. Puts others before him. Okay. These are okay. That's good. What was that? Faith. Okay. On the top. Harmony. Muru'ah. Yes, what is muru'ah? It's manliness, essentially. It's hard to explain though, and it can be at least slightly impacted by culture. Okay, we'll take one more over here. The ability to forget. Okay. So we came to the same conclusion that how many people are in the Faces Not Facebook session? Okay, do you remember the conclusion after we took audience feedback? That you guys pretty much knew everything that you needed to know? Okay, so the general principles, it seems like you already know pretty much everything you need to know, right? The problem is actually doing what? Doing it, right? Doing it is number one. Number two is actually something that applies to a lot of things. It applies in fiqh too. A lot of people don't realize how much this applies in fiqh. In fiqh, sometimes you have ideals, right? You have general concepts, but you have to do tanzil al-hukm ala al-waqi'. You have to bring this general concept, this general ruling, onto the particular case that you're dealing with, which is an issue of, it's much more difficult, right? So now you have honesty, you have integrity, you have bravery, you have courage, you have all these different things. But how do you make that particular value, how do you bring that to bear on a specific situation? And what is the manifestation of that quality in that situation? That's very difficult, right? That's much more difficult. So, which brings us back to another point that came up before and brings me into the first of the two things that I want to mention. There's 2 points that I want to make about the art of manliness, because we have a very limited amount of time, and these are the 2 things that I think are really important to take away. Number 1 is that you need mentors. You need mentors. You need someone who's not your age. So we're going to talk about 2 things. We're going to talk about your peers, that's going to be number 2. But number 1 is people that are older than you, people that have more experience than you. I'm not saying necessarily that they have to be more knowledgeable than you, right? They could be less knowledgeable than you, they could be equally knowledgeable to you, they could be more knowledgeable to you than you. What's important is that they have an amount of experience and they're tried and tested and they're living Islam. So, of course, my assumption here is that everyone cares to live Islam. I'm an imam, this is my assumption, always. So, if your framework is outside of the framework of Islam, that's a different area. We can talk about it privately if you want, but my assumption is that your framework is Islam. So what you're looking for are people who are older, people who have more experience than you, people you can relate to, that can be mentors for you, that you can spend time with, that can show you the details, how they happen. I think one of the most beautiful things that I was blessed with early in my Islam was that I lived with brothers away from home. And I lived with brothers who were very good brothers. They were very solid. And you learn through that things that you wouldn't learn otherwise. Right? So you can go to a class, you can attend something online, you can read some books, but you're not going to get those subtleties of how you interact and deal with each other that you get when you live with people. Right? And good people at that. So I remember one time, for example, one of the brothers, he was graduating and I wasn't graduating yet. He asked if he can borrow a shirt from me. Because this brother always wore extremely large clothes. And I also generally wore extremely large clothes at that period in my life. And so he knew I was the only other person in the MSA that would have a shirt that he could wear. So he came to me and said, do you have a dress shirt that I can wear for my graduation? So I said, yeah, I got you. I still have the shirt actually. Shows you how much things have changed in 8 years. It's a black shirt, black collared shirt. So he took it, he wore it, and he brought it back. And he brought it back washed and ironed and very nicely hanging on a hanger. Right? So I was kind of joking with him. My tendency was always to joke with the brother, but the brother was always very stoic. Right? He would just tell you exactly how it is, and he was very quiet, and he would move on. So I was joking with him. I told him, you guys know who I'm talking about? I'm talking about Hassan, for those of you who are from San Diego, and you remember that generation of people. He used to help with the Rabat youth. I don't know. Ibrahim might know. Anyways, so he brought it back, he put it like this. I took it from him, and I joked with him. I was like, man, you brought it back better than you even took it. And he just looked at me and said, yeah. That's what a Muslim is supposed to do. I was like, okay. I got you. Understood. Message is taken, you know. But you remember, right? You remember because you lived a certain experience with them. And you pick up on the subtleties of how someone washes the dishes, or how they do or do not clean the apartment, or how they behave in certain circumstances, how they deal with conflict, how they negotiate differences, how they have forgiveness with those that betray them. You know, all these type of things you pick up in actual lived interaction. So it's very important that we find people like that. And we understand and know that we can learn from their lives. Which brings us, number 1, to the first point, that your main resource is the seerah, is the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And a reminder to myself and others, because I'm also muqassir. I can never properly translate this word, but muqassir, I'm negligent in the rights of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That we should know him so well that we could think to ourselves like, okay, if the Prophet was with me right now, how would he respond? So to know the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam like that is number 1. And number 2 is to find those people. And this is something that actually, for those of you that were in the last session, I think it bears repeating, that the early generation of Muslims understood. And I mentioned the story, I won't go into all the details like last time, but basically two contemporary scholars, Ibn Sirin and Al-Qasim. Ibn Sirin used to send his students to go watch Al-Qasim because he knew that Al-Qasim grew up in the household of Aisha. So he knew that this person grew up in the prophetic household. So even though they were both major scholars of their time, he knew that this guy has some lived experience that maybe I don't have. So he wanted to pick up on. So this is a very, very important point. Point number 2, Ahmed, where did you go? Ahmed, raise your hand. You're in 38, you said? Okay. Point number 2 is that every man, this is from Art of Manliness, there's a series on reviving honor, 7 parts. In the 7th part, he talks about how and why honor should be revived in the modern days. So he says that one of the points that he makes is that every man needs a platoon. Every man needs a platoon. Anyone read Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell? Yeah? Yes? No? Do you remember this issue in Tipping Point about the power of numbers? And how if you go over 150, then the dynamics of the group change? We're probably over 150 now. But if you're over 150, the dynamics of the group change. So traditionally in armies and a company is about 150 people. Today, and even in Rome, 150 people was the size of the company. And the company was comprised of a number of platoons. Usually 3-4 platoons, they comprise this company. So the company is like the largest unit that you can legitimately still have a core level of brotherhood with. Because you can still know each other, you can still at some level engage with one another and have an intimate relationship at 150. But if you get down to 25 to 50, this is about the size of a platoon now. And 25 to 50, you have a very strong relationship. And I'm sure people who have had good MSA experiences can testify to this. That when you're in that range, it can be less as well. But when you're in that range, you can still bond and you can still be very close and very tight. So what he says is that one of the things that we need, and what I would suggest to people to implement, is, and I think this is a manifestation of وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ, that they recommend one another to truth and they recommend one another to patience, is this concept. That you need, essentially what you need is, in another term, you could say you need a gang of men. You need your boys. And you don't need your boys in the Jahili sense, in the ignorant, pre-Islamic type sense. You need your boys in the sense that these are the people that are going to have your back when you're trying to develop in your relationship with Allah. I'm not talking about the ones that are going to be telling you every single time they think that a sister is attractive, or that they want to marry this person or that person, or the ones that are telling you, well, we can just put off salat a little bit longer, or the ones that are telling you to not push yourself to go to the class when you need to go to the class, or the ones that are telling you to do all these things. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about a few good men. Those few people that are actually foundational for you in your development. At the end of the day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says what? That the best of friends are going to be enemies on the day of judgment, except the God conscious. That's the only group that's still going to be together. So when I'm talking about a few good men, a group that you can bind to, that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about other things. And these groups, they have a couple rules. So if you were to take this is what you need to remember. You need to have this group. Number 1, you have mentors. Number 2, you have a group of people around you. That group needs to have some rules. Rule number 1, only men. Alright? We don't have any sisters here, alhamdulillah. We can acknowledge that brothers start acting differently when sisters are around. Alright? It's a fact, right? Anyone want to argue this? I don't think so. The whole room is going to jump on you. Brothers start acting differently when sisters are around. So number 1 is that it has to be all men. Number 2 is that you have to have an agreement to one another in relation to that group. And you have a code that you follow. Alright, so you agree together that this group is important to you, and that you have a code that you're going to follow as a group. In Islam, this code is very easy. Basically, your code is that you don't do something haram. You have to obviously study that a little bit. That's the base level, is that you don't do things that are haram. And you're going to hold each other to that, right? And that if you contradict that, you're making your group weaker. This is very important. You have to have a group you have to keep in mind that it's about more than yourself. That you're making the whole group weaker by making the mistakes that you make. Right? The second level is to really study the life of the Prophet ﷺ. If you want like a manual for what you should do in a group like that, read Riyadh al-Salihin, the Gardens of the Righteous by Imam an-Nawawi. And preferably, this is perhaps a little bit controversial, if you use the Dar es-Salaam print, take the commentary on the hadith with a grain of salt. Some of them are better, some of them are less good, and just take it with a grain of salt and move on. But the hadith are there, they give you the parameters of how to live ethically and positively, and that can be kind of what you do. The third is that you need to meet face to face. Alright? No Google Hangouts, no calling each other over the phone, no having like a group for each other on Facebook or something like that. You need to meet face to face, see each other, look at one another, laugh together, feed each other. Whatever you need to do in order to build that relationship, you need to meet, again, face to face. Number 4 is that, I was hoping I was going to be able to remember this, and I'm not, so I have to look. I remember number 5, I can't remember number 4. Number 4 is to embrace healthy shame. This is an interesting one. To embrace healthy shame. Which means that part of why it's good to be in a group that has a standard is that when you mess up, you actually feel a little bit ashamed. Right? You feel kind of like embarrassed in front of your brothers. That's actually not a bad thing. To have a kind of, I'm not saying to go to an extreme with it and abuse yourself or others, but to have like a little bit of, you know what, these are my boys, and I messed up. I made a mistake, right? And it made all of us look bad. And I don't want to do that. So that little bit of healthy shame is important. And number 5 is to put the team above self. And when people don't do that, they need to be chastised, essentially. I'm not saying to like, again, don't adopt gang culture. The gangs have this within them, right? Like if you break the rules of the gang, most likely you're going to get beat up, right? So this concept is, I'm saying use the concept with a different application, right? Don't like, okay, you did something haram today, come, we need to... You cursed, that's 5 punches to the right arm, and you talk to the sister in an inappropriate way, that's 15. Like, don't do that. But have some, the group has to take precedent over the individual, all right? So these are just some of the advices. Basically, the 2 things to take away, however you deal with the details of it, is to, number 1, resource-wise, you deal with the life of the Prophet ﷺ, and always read the seerah and the sunnah. Read the seerah in the sense of the biography, and read the sunnah in the sense of the hadith. Because if you don't understand the life of the Prophet ﷺ, you're going to misunderstand and misapply the particular instances of the hadith. The hadith are very particular. So like, you know, when you go to the news and they have an interview with someone, or someone's interviewed, and they show it on the news, and then they take these little clips out, right? And you can take the clip out, and if you take what's in front of it and back of it, you take it out of its context, then it gets misunderstood, right? So you have to understand the life, the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, in the context of the seerah, of the biography of the Prophet ﷺ. So that's resource number 1. Resource number 2 is artofmanliness.com. What do you need to do? Number 1, find older people and people who have more experience. They don't always have to be older. They could just be people who have more experience and more wisdom, who can be your mentors. And number 2, find a group of people that you can agree to certain principles amongst yourselves to live by, and meet regularly, and hold yourselves to those principles. So I'll finish here. I'll give it over to Ustad Hassan, and at the end we have some question and answer time, inshallah. I know there's one question that needs to get addressed from our brother Oscar that we'll get to in the question and answer, inshallah. Jazakallah khair.